Good evening. Welcome to Oasis Church International and Oasis Community Development Center. Welcome to our podcast with the Mental Health Ministry. I am Minister Lisa Nicholson, and I am so happy to be here on this evening. So happy you're here. Please share with someone. If you are watching on this evening, we are on all of our social media platforms. Facebook, that's Oasis Church International, our website, oasischurchintl.org, the YouTube channel, as well as Oasis Community DC.org. Please share. We have an awesome topic on this evening, and it is on neuroplasticity and mental health. I am so honored to be here on this evening with the lovely and beautiful Miss Cheryl Checkers. She is a licensed mental health counselor, and we share something in common. Cheryl is the president of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Palm Beach County Board of Directors, and I am her vice president of the board. So it is so wonderful to be here with Cheryl. Cheryl is the brain behind a course that I took that NAMI offered, and it's integrated resilience training. I absolutely fell in love with it until I took the topics back to work and shared it with some of our team members. And I thought it would be most appropriate to share this topic with the masses on this evening, especially with all of the chaos and things that are going on in our world where there's a lot of negativity. So we're going to talk about negativity and positivity on tonight with our brains. So I like Cheryl to go ahead and introduce herself. And I'm going to give it to you, Cheryl. Oh, before I even start with Cheryl, I have to give my props to my pastor, Cassandra V. Fullwood. She is our senior pastor of Oasis Church International. Thank you so much for allowing us to move forward and do everything that we do with this mental health ministry. So go ahead, take it over, Cheryl.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa. And yes, it's super exciting to be here with you tonight, and certainly talking about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And I first wanted to say I appreciate so much you inviting me, and also Oasis Church International for doing so much good work surrounding mental health, and for supporting NAMI's efforts too. So thank you so much. As Lisa said, I'm Cheryl Checkers. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm also a nationally board certified counselor. I have some advanced certifications in trauma, anxiety, OCD, and autism. And as Lisa, as you stated, I have also served on the board of NAMI for almost 6 years now, and I've had the pleasure of working closely with you, Lisa. And I'm so excited to know you took the IRT course through NAMI, so it'll be great to hear some takeaways from you on that at some point tonight.
Yes. Okay. I am so ready to dive in. As you know, if you're out there, you have any questions for us, please feel free to ask questions, and we'll try to answer your questions. But yes, Cheryl, also I did want to mention your normal daily practice in mental health counseling. She does a lot with autism spectrum disorders, and a lot of different counseling. So Cheryl, I didn't know you had that much under your belt. Exciting.
Thank you, Lisa. And I also wanted to interject that I had a wonderful co-author to help me write IRT, and that was Amanda Copez, which is a big part of NAMI, and she's a social worker and a trauma-informed yoga instructor. So she brought a whole different perspective to IRT, which I'm sure we'll talk about it. a little more.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that. I saw her. She did a lot of the videos that we watched in there, and she is absolutely wonderful. So, Cheryl, if you could just tell me what neuroplasticity is and why does it matter?
Sure. So neuroplasticity it can be pretty complex, but to really simplify it, it's our ability to change our brains. So in the past 2 decades, research has been showing more and more that we actually have the ability to change our brains. And we many years ago thought we could only do that in childhood. And by age 20, our brains were pretty set. So to me, it's so empowering, and it's such a wonderful message, particularly within the mental health world, that we can change our brains. So we inadvertently train our brains oftentimes, like to be anxious or to react in certain ways, and to know that we don't have to live like that forever. Like we have the ability to change that, and that's the power of neuroplasticity.
That is so awesome. I absolutely love it. There is a scripture in the Bible that talks about renewing our minds on a daily basis, and another one that talks about transforming our minds. So when, I got into this lesson, that's all I thought about was, having the ability to renew our minds on a daily basis. But I know that there's a lot of people that do not know how to, that may struggle, in terms of having, those positive thoughts. So I wanted to also ask you, now you mentioned that we typically would think about this as younger beings. So is there like an age limit in terms of changing our brains?
So I'm very excited to tell you that our latest research says no, we can change our brains no matter how old we are. Although we change our brains the most before age 20, it's great news to know that no matter what our age, we still have that ability. Our brain can rewire. So and we can rewire it by doing even simple things, which Lisa, you probably learned a lot about in IRT, and I should probably talk a little bit more about what IRT is, so everybody knows what we're talking about. So NAMI was given a grant by Palm Healthcare Foundation to create an 8-week, and it's 2 hours once a week protocol called integrative resilience training. And it's so great because IRT was founded on the science of neuroplasticity. And it was a switch from looking at just what's wrong with us, like the medical model, like focused on what's wrong, but it shifted focus to looking at like what's right. How do we build on strengths, and how do we teach people this about neuroscience and the things that they can do on a daily basis to make changes to their brain. So NAMI not only provided this as a free service, a free group, but we also were able to get funding through NAMI National Organization to create a train the trainer or a facilitator model. So we've trained facilitators now to lead IRT. And one of our first groups was training individuals from many different organizations in our community so we could spread this wonderful message. And I do want to say, like, even though IRT was really kind of like 10 years in the making, because it stemmed from me doing a lot of talking about resilience and neuroscience and what I was doing with my clients that had treatment-resistant depression and things that didn't always, show good outcome to typical therapy. And I was talking about this quite a bit, and the former ED of NAMI, unbeknownst to me, was also talking to Amanda Kopes, who was talking a lot about trauma-informed yoga and mindfulness and regulation techniques. And I knew Amanda, but I didn't know that she had that interest in neuroscience as well. So after the pandemic, we were put together, Amanda and I were put together, and to create this, to use, everything we did in practice. And I call it like the cream on top of all the therapy I've ever done, like the best of the best, and put it into this IRT, and Amanda did the same. So, definitely during the pandemic, and even now, as you mentioned, Lisa, with a lot of uncertainty, happening, we saw like there was a bigger focus on resilience, and why were some people resilient? Why did some people get depressed? Why did others not? Things like that. And so it even had us doubling down into looking at resilience, and can we like gain more from understanding people that were actually resilient, rather than just looking at, okay, these people were depressed, and what did the depression look like? Like how can we build in the things that the resilient people have, and the people that maybe weren't as resilient? So that, that was another driving force. So neuroscience based, and then looking at, like, again, a shift away from disease model to a resilience model, and how can we help people be more resilient in everyday life, not just through like pandemics and things that we don't expect, when uncertainty hits. But how do we build that practice in for people, and how do we share? Like it's such a wonderful message, very empowering. I can say to clients I've worked with for over, I've been in practice, I'm going to age myself, but for a very long time. So it's probably closer to 30 years now, somewhere between 25 and 30 years. So I've found that if I can talk to my clients about what's happening in their brain and help them realize, like, for instance, if they wire their brain to be anxious, that we can rewire it so they're not so anxious. Yeah. And that, gives them some hope. Like they actually know, like, it's not a weakness of character. It's not that I'm not trying hard enough, that I've actually like wired my brain that way. And that's why this is happening. But now we're going to work on changing that. So that's a very long answer to say that I'm very excited about integrative resilience training, neuroscience, and certainly resilience.
That is perfectly fine, and you did an awesome job explaining all of that. I can tell you, when I first took the class, I thought that this was just going to be way above my head. I wasn't going to understand, but it was just, I mean, even I think an elementary child would be able to understand the way that they broke it down. So kudos to our staff at NAMI, because they did an excellent job. I wanted to kind of piggyback on something you said about how a person trained their brains. So what would you say if someone has a mental illness and they feel like, well, I didn't train my brain this way. It's automatically like this. I'm very anxious. I may have bipolar disorder. And speaking, from someone that have that disorder, I can't control my thoughts. I have racing thoughts, and it's always negative thoughts, or I have paranoia. And then, you have some with schizophrenia. What would you say about those types of illnesses?
Yeah, so that's a really good point and a great question. So, neuroplasticity and resilience is not to say that people don't need medication and typical therapy protocols. What I think where the power of it comes in is when, like, for instance, you mentioned bipolar and racing thoughts or paranoia. Like, there's a need for medication oftentimes when those symptoms arise. But, in addition, and I have worked with many people over the years with bipolar disorder and even schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, that those were my specialty for many years. And you know, what happens, like when you experience the symptoms that you're talking about, like it can bring on further anxiety and trauma and all these other things. So it's not to say like it's one or the other, but more to say like you can build in like neuroscience education and you know, assessing for anxiety that might have been secondary to experiencing, like particularly clients I've had in the past with schizophrenia, you know, when you're experiencing hallucinations, you tend to isolate because it's like it's very, can be very scary and isolating. And then your anxiety can build, like you can have social anxiety where you never had it before. So now like you might be on your medications and stable, but there's like this other anxiety keeping you from leaving the house. So, you know, when I say like train our brains, you know, there's definitely genetics and other things at play. And IRT actually isn't for people that are not stable on medication. If they have a what we consider a serious mental illness or SMI, it's for people, you know, that don't need, like it, you don't even have to have a diagnosis, but if you do, it's definitely like there's higher level things that have to happen first before you can utilize the IRT skills.
No, that's so good to know. Very good information. So if it's like a serious mental illness, I guess that connection, that connectedness is just not going to happen, correct?
Well, I mean, I'm not, maybe I describe the connectedness a little more.
So like for example, if I have bipolar disorder and I'm to the point where, let me just say this, I'm very resilient. and, right, you know, and I have to thank God because, you know, not everyone have the testimony, you know, that I have, but in order, you mentioned power, you know, and I believe there is a lot of power in the brain, and there's also a lot of power with faith. But there are some people where, you know, may have to be confined, may have to be on many types of medications, may not be able to even comprehend, you know, how I can connect, you know, the positive with the negative. So that's what I mean. Like maybe there's, you know, somewhere that connectedness may not be there. So I do understand about the serious mental illness versus. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Lisa, like there may be some, you know, certainly this isn't for everybody, but it, you know, the neuroplasticity can still happen. So say you're on a lot of medication, you're not able to be out in the world, you can still incorporate some of the things that make your life have meaning and feel purposeful. And like it, you have to adapt it for sure. But I like to think that most people's brains, even people that have had traumatic brain injuries, have benefited from neuroplasticity. And we're learning more. Like we know the tip of the iceberg right now, right? So this is like something that I feel in neuroscience we'll continue to learn, but there's reason to be hopeful for sure. And I mean, even, you know, seeing the people that have the brain injuries be able to form neural pathways that even make up for the injured parts of their brain. I mean, our brain is powerful. So,
Yes.
and it's not to underscore what challenges are in SMI by any means. And I work very closely with psychiatrists, and when I'm working with my clients that have bipolar or schizophrenia or schizoaffective, I'm definitely like, we're looking at first line medication, let's get things stable. But I'm also working on, you know, like building new neural networks that, you know, that allow people to go forward in their life. You know, it's really the things that hold you back. So like, you know, for anxiety is a huge one. So we're talking about the brain. So I'm going to throw in there the amygdala, which is one of my favorite parts of the brain because there's such a, you know, there's such a large amount of therapy protocols and different things that you can take advantage of the neuroplasticity to quiet our amygdala down. So our amygdala is our alarm center. And I teach this to even my children clients that I work with, because when they come in with anxiety, and oftentimes I don't just work with someone with anxiety, most of my clients have like the SMI plus the anxiety plus the OCD plus the depression. So it's very complex. But when we get down to working on anxiety, like I'm educating them on the amygdala, and your amygdala is the alarm center of your brain, and its job is to keep you safe. And if there's a fire, your amygdala is going to say run. So it's going to make your heart rate increase and your breathing, increase. And it's going to help you get out of there, get out of the building, right? But if you have social anxiety, it's going to do that same thing sometimes when you're around people, because your brain doesn't know the difference between feeling socially anxious or a fire. It just knows you're sending a danger signal to it. So It responds. So there are wonderful ways to build neural pathways that start to bring that response down, so that we can expose ourselves to things that we want to be a part of, that our amygdala is going, no.
Right.
So that's something I do see in my clients oftentimes when they have bipolar, and I work with a lot of young adults that are just getting diagnosed with bipolar, and oftentimes I'm the one that's diagnosing them, but it's these different layers. And so yes, the neuroplasticity won't help the bipolar disorder. They'll get on medication, and I'll do a protocol that focuses on managing bipolar. But then when we get it managed, we can work on these other pieces that help them live life more fully, if that makes sense. Hopefully
it does. I think about my journey, and I was at a point in my life where I had to be managed first, in terms of medication, because my emotions were off the Richter scale, especially. I think one reason was awareness and the lack of. So, once I became self-aware of a lot, and a lot that was going on with me, getting in tune with myself, and the medication, I was able to not only just listen, but be more receptive to the tools that were provided to me. So I think that is so important. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I think those that, may be struggling, we're talking about resilience in the brain and everything. Sometimes people want to jump to that resilience or that healing. I want to be overnight, and it's just not going to happen that way.
Yeah. So for sure. And I tell my clients oftentimes, I wish I had a magic wand, because I'd wave it over them in a minute, right? I want to get them to that healing part, but we know it is a journey, and you're doing so amazing. And, you took IRT, and hopefully you were able to have some takeaways from IRT. And, really when we were developing IRT, we were looking at how do we teach these tools to kids, adolescents particularly, so that they have the tools, because oftentimes, it's not always genetic, right? A lot of things that we experience environmentally, like traumas and things like that, can cause us to have anxiety or depression, and some other things can happen. And we're how we know that life's going to throw a lot at our kids, right? So how do we build these tools in so our kids are more likely to be resilient when they face adversity? Because we know we all face adversity. We can't go through life unscathed, unfortunately. But so we were looking at how do we do that? How do we share these tools? And then we decided to start with adults, because we thought if we teach adults, parents can teach their kids, because we know oftentimes parents don't have the tools to begin with. So it was really more based on that than actual like mental health treatment, but more like how do we prevent like some of the mental health things that can result by not being resilient, but then also how can we build up some of the things that really help us be resilient when we have a mental health diagnosis, like living a life of purpose, living in gratitude, shifting our mindset to a growth mindset, things like that.
Yes, yes, awesome. You know, we were talking about the amygdala, and that was like one of my favorite, that fight, flight, that's responsible for the fight, flight, and fear and all of that. And, it made me think about when we talked about the hippocampus, that I had so much revelation. And it was talking about the part of the brain that is responsible for memory. So when you just was mentioning like the trauma, it kind of, and just correct me if I'm right or wrong, but it's like it made me think about, like, if you suffered from any type of trauma, whether it's childhood trauma, as a young adult trauma, and it's in your memory bank. So when you talk about the neuroplasticity, or the amygdala, it's like you're fighting up against something that happened years ago to you. So that's where all of those negative thoughts and patterns are coming from. Kind of explain that a little more, because I'm not a clinician. So
I'll do my best. It's complex, but you're right on about that. So when we experience trauma, the reason why it's so hard to overcome it is it actually hits three parts of our brain. So it hits our amygdala, our fear center, that we talked about. It hits our hippocampus, which is our memory retrieval center. And it also hits our prefrontal cortex, which is where we regulate our emotions. It's the thinking part of our brain. It's where we do our organizational skills and things like that, make decisions. So if we you think about it, so if our brain is storing trauma, we first of all, like the hippocampus has difficulty when we experience trauma in determining like what's a new memory and what's an old memory. And then our amygdala, which is the trying to keep us safe, if the hippocampus remembers something from say 30 years ago, but it's really given the information to the rest of our brain that it may have just happened. Our amygdala throws us in fight or flight, as you said, the fight or flight. And then fight or flight shuts down so our prefrontal cortex is right up here behind our forehead. And our amygdala can shut that thinking part down. And then we can't manage our emotions, because that's where we're supposed to do that from. So it can definitely, impact us greatly. So when we're working in trauma care, we have to consider all three of those things.
Yes, absolutely. That's so good, because everybody I'm telling you all, if you all here are out there, if you're out there listening, and you want more information, you have to reach out. And I'm sure we can get you more information on neuroplasticity, because this is really deep. It's very complex, but once you understand it, it is so good. And just the different tools, like, I learned the
affirmation. So
exactly.
Simple as, so I even teach this to my clients who are children, so because they oftentimes because one of my specialties is, I told you, SMI, but also autism. So many of my clients with autism have experienced traumas throughout their life and continual. So it's maybe not like a big trauma, like oftentimes we think of like sexual abuse or, traumas that were right away going, okay, that's a trauma. But you can also experience kind of like micro traumas that happen every day, like being bullied and being not accepted or not fitting in anywhere, being misunderstood, like every day of your life. So these traumas add up, and like they take a toll too. So even my children come in and they're very dysregulated. They're there's so much going on, and the anxiety, like just thinking about all three of those parts of the brain that this
Mhm.
affects, and those are major parts of our brain. So
Exactly.
like the fingertip affirmation, Lisa, you
Yes.
showed, like one big thing I say to my clients is, like, when they start to talk about trauma, they get, they can get triggered easily. I am calm. So that's very grounding. And I
Yes.
teach them that, and they'll do that, like, so it becomes like you can train your brain to cue calmness on even simple things like that. So when my clients are in class and they can't say "I am calm" out loud, they can
Right.
use their fingertips underneath their desk and "I am calm" and cue their brain into a more calm state. Because as you mentioned, that fight or flight of the amygdala, when you've experienced trauma, it's so overactive. So it
Yes.
tells you, like, imagine, like, you're triggered. And I've worked with a lot of people, from veterans returning from war zones to first responders to you know
Mhm.
clients who have experienced childhood traumas. Like, there's all forms of traumas, and
Yes.
there's all forms of triggers. So I think of a first responder who told me, like, he had seen some people perish in a fire, which is, you can't
Ooh,
imagine how horrible that is, right? For anyone, let alone a first responder that's supposed to be able to save you, right?
yes.
And so they were having a very hard time, because anytime they saw a building that looked like the building, or they thought they smelled smoke or anything, like, they were thrown right back into that, what they were experiencing. So it the amygdala, it just reacts. So
Yes.
if you're not able to store the information, or you don't process it through correctly, your brain is still, like, triggering you to experience something as if it's happening currently. So
Right.
it's so, it makes a lot of sense when you think about it like that. And oftentimes, particularly for like combat veterans and people that they're trained when they go into combat to be almost like machines, right? Because they've got
Right.
to protect
Right.
themselves and their fellow soldiers. And they take it as they come back, and they take it as some kind of weakness, that and it's their brain is doing all this stuff to them. So, like, I really feel like normalizing this education and sharing it more, it can be very complex, but IRT, as we were talking earlier, we tried to bring neuroscience down to an understandable level,
Yes.
because it is empowering. No matter what you're experiencing, it's very empowering to understand it's your brain and not a weakness, or a character weakness, or, like, again, like, you're not trying hard enough. It's
Right. It's good to know that we have the power. The brain is so powerful, and we have the power to retrain our brains.
Yeah.
So that's going to lead me into the mindfulness. If we could talk a little bit about mindfulness, and then I want to talk about the difference between growth mindset and toxic positivity.
Okay. So mindfulness is one of the most heavily researched practices. And research has shown, like, they've done so many research studies that included fMRIs, of scans where they looked at the brain before and after mindfulness practices. And the mindfulness practices do rewire the brain. Like, there's structural differences. Like, they're seeing things on scans, so it's not just like a
Yeah.
subjective, I think. It's not to say that we know everything. And certainly, I should have said at the beginning, I'm not a neuroscientist by any means. I'm just a clinician who has a very strong interest, and was lucky to be mentored by a psychiatrist I'm very close with, who started out as an NIH brain researcher and wants his clients to know everything about what medication does to the brain. And we have worked together for 25 plus years. So I've been lucky to be educated by him, and it's really ignited my passion to continually learn more. So while I'm not a neuroscientist, like if I can learn it, I feel like other people can learn it too.
Yes, yes. Someone in the chat is saying I've married and friends to people who have PTSD, and it's no joke.
No, definitely not. It's heartbreaking, really. It's heartbreaking, and it affects so many people. I really feel, that, while people may feel alone, it being a clinician over the years, like I've seen more of my clients have PTSD than not. And I know I'm just one person. So many of my colleagues are EMDR specialists and work with trauma. That's their specialization. And like they're usually hard to even get an appointment with. A lot of people experience PTSD.
And I wanted to ask, can you give some examples of mindfulness or mindfulness exercises? Maybe I should say it that way.
Yeah. So what I tell my clients is there's so much wonderful stuff out there on the internet these days, and like meditation or mindfulness practices, they can be anything. Like they can be short little 2-minute practices you do every day, or an hour a day, or even more. Like everybody, something different speaks to every person, I guess I should say. And it's really worth trying and sampling and seeing what works for you, because
like deep breathing works really good for me.
Yeah. Deep breathing is a huge one. And, really a staple or a foundational skill that, as a therapist that I'm teaching in, because not only is that great for mindfulness, but it can force the amygdala to quiet down. Like, for instance, if you're having a panic attack, many of my clients do experience those. And what do you do in the moment when you can't breathe and you've like triggered that amygdala to think you're in complete danger, and the everything's going off. Not only does that amygdala like send the danger signal and make our breathing more shallow and some of the other things I shared with you, but it also like takes the blood. It moves the blood to the parts of our body that helps us flee. It's really good if we're in that fire, because the blood's going to our legs. It's going away from our digestive system, because our digestive system isn't needed at the moment. So that's why you hear many people say, I feel nauseous, or my stomach feels funny when that's happening. And what it also does is, like, there's adrenal glands in the bottom, like towards the bottom of our back. And when that alarm center sends the signal, then we get this cortisol and adrenaline and all this stuff running through our bodies. So deep breathing is one way to quiet or reverse that, or to recover from that anxiety response.
Right. And that's I like how you mentioned that about the way the blood flows. We were talking about it in the class that I was taking, and we were talking about our responses to different events that can happen, and how some people may respond by just getting stuck. Like you just can't move, and then some may be able to run, but and I think that's so amazing just how their body responds.
And that's one that we like many times leave out. So it's not just fight or flight; it's fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes.
And so our bodies can freeze up as well. So we all react differently to anxiety, but that is one of the responses. And and we become immobilized when that happens. I'm glad you went over that. What was your favorite part? You didn't tell me.
My favorite is talking about the amygdala. I mean, that really was my favorite part, and a lot about like the resilience, positivity. I want us to talk a little bit about positivity as well. The difference between growth mindset and toxic positivity, and then just that positive mindset as well.
Yeah. So, I'm glad that you asked that. And it, so I think a lot of people become accustomed to people saying, just think positive no matter what we're going through, right? Like, oh, think positive. Oh, you're always thinking of the negative. Well, that's not what positive psychology is about, or a growth mindset.
Positive
um,
psychology.
Toxic positivity is always be positive. Don't feel your emotions. Like, don't, like we're supposed to, that's healthy to feel our emotions. It's healthy to feel, the feels, whether it's negative or positive. So it's not to say that, but what a growth mindset is you're focused on, a lot of what we've been talking about. Like, how can I, like, if something is holding me back, or something, I'm anxious and I want to be around people and I can't, like,
Mhm.
like how do we grow in ways that help us have a better life? And it's a buffer against mental health conditions. So if we're in line, like we're living our life in line with what our purpose is, and we have a reason to get up every morning, and not that every morning. I mean, I'm saying that like kind of as a blanket statement, but
Mhm.
we don't always want to get up every morning, right? But if we do have a purpose, like something in our life that has meaning, and we know of these things, and we either have discovered them or we're working towards discovering them, that's the growth mindset. So it's much different than saying just be positive all the time.
Right.
And but talking about like positive psychology, which actually is neuroscience based, there is a lot of research that has shown that like simple things of like changing to a more positive mindset in some ways can be really super helpful. For instance, and I'm sure Lisa, you learned about this in IRT, is that being grateful, and it's not like, when you say that, and I say it a lot to my clients, and it's often not met well. Because they're like, how can I be grateful because I'm experiencing all these things, right? Like all these hard things. And so it's not just like be grateful for what you have kind of thing. It's more of a mindset of how can, no matter how bad my day is today, I find one or two or three little things to be grateful for. So
Mhm.
it might be, I'm so grateful for that hot cup of coffee I have in the morning, or the herbal tea I'm going to have when I get through this hard day, or I'm going to take a hot bath tonight. Like it, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
So what the research has shown, and they've done like quite a bit of study on this, is if you for like 10 days or a week or 2 weeks, even better, if you can get in the practice of recognizing three small things you're grateful for every day and make note of them, that's another thing they've studied with the brain. It actually changes something in the brain. So it isn't all about like you have to be positive all the time, but like in times of uncertainty, and you mentioned, the time we're in now, and there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of people are frightened, and and so how are we okay, how do we be resilient from this, especially when it might be against like what something we believe in. And I think it makes it even more important to do those things, to focus,
Yes.
because if we can, and I'll say this like many times, many of my clients watch the media all day long and read Reddit, and like they have depression. So it brings them back into that depression. And so, you know, finding a healthy balance, you know, to make sure you're aware of what's going on, but also to like do some things you have control over. Like, how can I volunteer or let my voice be heard? Or how can I, like, what are some little things I can do today that I really like, even if it's reading a book I really wanted to read? Or like, how can I build, you know, some things in that I'm grateful for to counteract or buffer against some of the other things that I don't have control over.
Yes, yes. And you know that all goes back to rewiring our brains. So that's the power right there. You know, it seems so little, but it's so huge. It's enormous. You know what you're saying. I absolutely love this topic, as you can tell. I want to kind of talk just a few minutes, and we'll be wrapping up soon. I know we got started late, so we got to steal a few more minutes. But I wanted to talk about forgiveness when we were kind of talking about the amygdala and trauma and, you know, past traumas. I know that, you know, usually forgiveness is going to be needed because someone has done something that hurt you, which is a part of a healing process. So how would you relate like forgiveness with the positive psychology and the, I don't know if it's the amygdala or if it's the prefrontal cortex, but how would you, you know, put that all together?
Wow, Lisa. Well, that's a tough question for 8 o'clock at night, but I really like it. So forgiveness is very powerful, whether it's forgiving yourself or you're forgiving a person that was involved in your trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, so I don't have research on exactly what parts of the brain forgiveness touches, but I can say that, you know, not everyone can forgive. Everybody has to do it in their own time. I've seen amazing things when my clients have reached that point of being able to forgive. And oftentimes it's more so like forgiving themselves,
Right.
even though they, you know, they're innocent victims. And, but I would imagine that it probably hits all parts of our brain. And I would imagine like our prefrontal cortex, where we're, you know, thinking part of our brain. I see many of my clients get stuck in these thought loops of like, should I, you know, especially if it's a family member, you know, it's like, gets very complicated. So do I forgive? Should I forgive? I'm not going to forgive. I might forgive. And you can be in that. So I think of it more as being like in the grief wheel, where you go back and forth between anger and, you know, sadness and all these emotions, and you can get pulled in and out. And when you're ready, you know, if you're ready, then forgiveness can be hugely powerful. It lets go the power. It is power, right? Like,
Yes.
not holding anger towards someone is a lot of power, and it can destroy you. So it is very important to address that. I do feel like that definitely is more than just what we talked about in IRT,
Yes.
but a very important thing. And I would love to know, when forgiveness happens, what happens to our brains, because it must be a lot later.
Exactly. I mean, I know that, you know, I think we all probably have had to forgive, you know, someone at some point, but I know that, you know, I've gone through that process, and it's definitely a process, and you have to want to do it. You know, you have to be intentional. So I thought about it because it reminds me of rewiring, you know, that brain to, you know, think of, and a growth mindset as well, you know, just continue at it.
Absolutely.
Keep at it. So
well, you've given me my homework. You have to have me back after I do some research on that.
Yes, yes, yes. The power of forgiveness in the mind. Yes. There was someone that mentioned in the chat that they are a federal employee. They're a single parent, and there's just a lot going on right now. What would you tell that person, and even anyone else that is watching right now, when it comes down to the power of the mind and rewiring our brains and being resilient?
Well, one thing, being a therapist, I'm a huge proponent of therapy. I myself seek it out when I need it. I feel like everybody should have therapy.
Yes.
And it's not a weakness to seek it out in moments where you feel you need it. It's actually a power. Like it's actually, getting the help and support you need is really an amazing thing. And it can be so difficult to take the first step, but and we put all these things on us that don't need to be there. Like it's just like, if I'm having a hard time right now and things are piling up, then maybe it's a good time to reach out and seek some support through counseling, so
Yes.
I can process through. And it's not just talk. Like in therapy, psychotherapy is not just talk. Like it's planning, and like if there's things going on with other family members, or like jobs, or like how you're even talking about everything going on in the world today. Therapy can be a very powerful tool for that. And even though like the rewiring the brain and IRT can be super helpful as well, and in many cases, just as we kind of like we're coming full circle, Lisa, as you said, there's times when you might need something more than that, and it might be therapy, it might be medication, but a therapist is a good start, and then you go from there. But it can be really helpful, and it's something I feel like it's good to be able to lean on throughout your life when needed, especially right now.
Yes, yes. And that's the thing, and that's where, my heart just, goes out, and prayers are with, the entire country, because there are a lot of federal workers that are being affected right now and losing their jobs. And this happens to be a person that, is, hearing a lot about, the loss of jobs, in their job, maybe in jeopardy, and hopefully not. But I'm just wondering, do we have enough therapists out there for everything that's just going on? I mean, it's so much. So, I wanted to talk about how, just quickly, and then we're going to wrap it up. How, and this is the first thing I learned when I started the class, how our brains automatically are wired to think negative, and how we are able to change it, to the positive, rewiring that brain. So why does it automatically think negative?
Well, that's another good question, Lisa. So what I tell my clients is our brains are like are like Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. So
That's good.
think about it. You can give a presentation, like we'll say tonight, like we're talking, and say we have 100 people here, and 99 of the people say, "Oh, this was great information," hopefully.
Exactly.
And then one person says, "I don't believe any of that. That didn't make sense. It was made up," or whatever. Like, has a lot of negative things to say. What is our brain going to hang on to? The 99 positive or that one negative? That's the way our brains are built. That's the way they're made. And I don't know if we know, at least I'm not aware of exactly why that happens, but I know it happens. And,
Yes.
we can, like, especially when we feel we're not in control, like if we might, like, are we going to lose a job, or what's coming, tomorrow, what's coming next? Like that opens up our brain to do something called catastrophizing, where we can think like every worst thing that could possibly happen. And our brain will latch onto that. Oftentimes it does it at night, especially when we're going through something. Like, it
Yes.
prevents us from sleeping, which, it's a vicious cycle. So yeah, like we do hang on to the negative. That's why we have to do things like IRT, and we have to make a conscious effort
Yes.
to put in the positive. And again, not like the toxic positivity, but I'm just reading this. Wow, that's really beautiful. Oh.
But this one says she's afraid of losing a home, car, everything that God has blessed her with.
Yeah, I'm so sorry for the person going through that. That's a lot. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what I wanted to share, and this, is from a spiritual standpoint. I mean, I just believe that because we were born in sin and shaped in iniquity, that sin is negative. So when we are born, before receiving Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, we're going to have a lot of negativity, and we're going to always fight against that because the world that we live in. But the Bible also talks about being transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I have to say that this lesson and neuroplasticity and breaking down the different parts of the brain, the way that God created our brains, is powerful. We are created in the image of God, and we have the ability to rewire our brains. And for those that are out there that are struggling right now, that are uncertain right now, I just believe that if you do take some of the tools that Cheryl has talked about this evening, you may need to see a psychiatrist. You may need to see a therapist. I'm a big proponent of therapy. I absolutely am. It's helped me so much. It continues to help me. And I'll tell anyone to please, take advantage of therapy. Take advantage of, the grounding techniques. I am calm. I will be strong, and continue, to have those positive affirmations. And I just believe that if you begin to rewire, your brains, that God will come alongside, with his Holy Spirit, and he will come and help you get through everything that you're going through. Why would I say that? Is because he's allowed me to be resilient. So I was at a very low place in my life, and it was prayer, yes. But again, we talk a lot with NAMI about, the faith community and mental health. And as most people in faith community know, that back in the day, we were raised, you just pray about it and everything's going to be okay. I believe that prayer changes things all the time. But at the same time, I do believe God has given us doctors. God has given us therapists. We need to do whatever we need to do for our brains, for our eat right. I wish we had enough time, because maybe we need a part 2 of this about feeding that brain. I've learned so much, just from the things I've gone through. Cheryl, I have to say thank you so much. Any final words that you would like to leave with our leave with our audience? Any final words?
Yeah, absolutely. And Lisa, thank you so much. You're such a beautiful spirit. And, I've been so blessed to be around you. And yes, you are one of the most resilient people. Your light shines so bright. Thanks for all you're doing. Thanks for.
Thank you.
And it did, as you were speaking, I was reminded that FAU's Brainy Days events has one event on your brain on God. So talking about research on what the changes are in your brain on God. So that's really exciting.
Nice.
What I'd love to leave people with is, I hope that there's something I said today that resonates with you, and that it just starts your journey into learning more. When I first started out as a therapist, I wasn't trained in neuroscience, so I didn't understand a lot of what happens with our brains. And it is very empowering. And, there's many books and videos and amazing things you can learn from. So I'm just hoping I plant the seed today.
You did.
And check out NAMI. You know, we have the IRT curriculum. I'm not sure when our next group might be, but you can certainly check in NAMIPBC.org.
Yes, absolutely. And then on your journey as well, we offer many programs through NAMI, whether it's, you know, the family to family, whether it's the peer to peer program, family support groups. We have youth support groups and programs as well. We have Ending the Silence for Families. We have so much that you can reach out, you know, and get, and it's free. So there's so many free services, free programs that will help you in your quest to be resilient. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cheryl. And yes, NAMIPBC.org. Cheryl, do you want to just give your contact information if someone would like therapy or even some referrals by you? Cheryl is great for referrals.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. My website's CherylCheckers.com. So CHERYL, checkers like the game.com.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lisa.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.